He was there, sitting at the dinner table, driving you to school, present in all the family photos. But you always felt like something was missing. A part of you always knew he wasn't really there, that his body occupied space, but his presence filled nothing. And you've spent your entire life trying to understand why you felt so empty, so incapable of trusting, so desperate for validation, when you seemingly had a present father. Carl Jung identified something that will completely change the way you understand your childhood. He discovered that there's a type of abandonment even more devastating than physical absence, an abandonment that happens when the father is present, but emotionally gone. And the worst part, the child who suffers this type of neglect spends their entire life not being able to name what happened, because after all, the father was there, wasn't he? Let me tell you about Ethan. Ethan was 43 years old when he came to see me, a successful entrepreneur, married for 15 years, 2 kids, and completely incapable of feeling love. He described it like this: I look at my wife. She's wonderful. I know I should love her, but I don't feel anything. I look at my kids playing and I should feel joy, but it's like there's glass between me and my emotions. When I asked about his childhood, Ethan looked confused. He said, my childhood was typical. My dad worked a lot, but he was present. Igu never hit me, never yelled at me. I have nothing to complain about. And here's the first sign. When someone describes their childhood as typical, without being able to remember moments of real emotional connection, Jung would say that we're facing an invisible wound, the wound of the father who was there, but never really there. I'm going to explain what Jung discovered about the father complex. The father complex is a psychological structure that forms in the early years of life. It's like a program that runs in the background of your mind, influencing how you relate to authority, to success, to your own self-worth. When the father is emotionally present, this complex develops in a healthy way. The child internalizes an image of a father that is safe, protective, validating. But when the father is physically present and emotionally absent, something different happens. The child forms an image of a father that is confusing, a father who should be connected, but isn't. A father who seems to be there, but is actually somewhere else. And this confusion becomes the blueprint for all future relationships. Ethan told me a memory that changed everything. He was 7 years old, came home from school with an A+ in math, ran to show his father. The father glanced at the paper, said, "Good job," and went back to reading the newspaper. No hug, no eye contact, no celebration, just "good job," and silence. Ethan told me. I remember standing there, holding the paper, waiting for something more, but nothing came. And I didn't understand why I felt so empty when I should have been happy. This moment, which seems so small, is actually a portrait of an entire childhood. 1,000 moments like that. 1,000 times seeking connection. 1,000 times finding an invisible wall. And the child, incapable of understanding what is happening, starts to create explanations. I'm not interesting enough. My accomplishments aren't important. I need to do more to deserve attention. These explanations become beliefs, and these beliefs shape an entire life. Now pay attention, because this is crucial. Jung identified that the father has a specific function in the psychological development of the child. The father represents the principle of logos, order, structure, the connection with the external world. When the father is emotionally present, he functions as a bridge between the child and the world. He validates the child's existence in the world. He says, through his emotional presence, you exist, you matter, you have a place. But when this bridge doesn't exist, the child is lost between two worlds. They know they exist physically, but they can't feel that they exist emotionally. And this feeling of unreality, of not feeling completely alive, haunts the person for decades. Ethan described exactly that. He said, "Sometimes I look at my hands and they don't feel like mine. I look at my life and it feels like I'm watching a movie about someone else. This isn't craziness. This is the result of a child who was never seen emotionally by the father. But wait, there's something even deeper that I need to show you." Jung talked about the concept of mirroring. In the early years of life, the child needs to see themselves reflected in the eyes of the parents, needs to see sparkle, needs to see interest, needs to see love. This mirroring is how the child learns who they are. When the mother looks at the baby with love, the baby learns, I am lovable. When the father looks at the child with pride, the child learns, I am capable. But what happens when the child looks at the father and finds empty eyes, eyes that seem to look through them, eyes that are present but aren't seeing? The child learns something devastating. I am invisible. I'm not interesting enough to be seen. There's something wrong with me. Let me tell you what happened to Ethan at 16. He won a state swimming competition. It was the most important moment of his life, until then. When he got out of the pool, he looked for his father in the stands. The father was there, sitting, reading his phone. Hadn't seen the race. Ethan told me. In that moment, I decided that I was never going to try to impress anyone again. If my own father didn't care enough to watch, why would anyone else care? Do you understand what happened there? It wasn't just a distracted father. It was the moment that Ethan gave up on seeking emotional connection. It was the moment the wound crystallized into armor. And he spent the next 27 years living behind that armor, without feeling, without connecting, without understanding why. Now I'm going to reveal something that Jung discovered about how this emotional neglect manifests in adulthood. There are patterns that repeat, and if you recognize yourself in these patterns, it means that this wound is still active in you. First pattern, the constant search for male validation. People who had emotionally absent fathers often spend their lives seeking the validation they never received. At work, they desperately seek the approval of male bosses. In relationships, they choose partners who are emotionally unavailable. That dynamic probably sounds familiar, doesn't it? Ethan did exactly that. He worked 70 hours a week, trying to impress a boss who was never satisfied. And when he finally received praise, he felt only emptiness. Because no external validation can ever fill the hole left by a father. Second pattern, the difficulty in trusting others. If your father, the first male figure in your life, was present but not connected, you learned that people can be near and simultaneously far away. This creates a fundamental distrust. You expect to be emotionally abandoned, even when the person is physically present, Ethan told me. When my wife says she loves me, I'm always waiting for the but, waiting for the condition, waiting for her to leave, because that's what I know. He couldn't believe that someone could be genuinely present, because the only reference he had was a father who pretended to be. Third pattern, the fear of success. This seems contradictory, but Jung explained it. if when you were a child, your accomplishments didn't generate an emotional response from your father, you learned that success is empty. You might compulsively seek success, but when you achieve it, you feel nothing. Or you might sabotage your own success because you unconsciously know it won't bring what you really want. Ethan had built a multi-million-dollar company, and he felt exactly nothing. He said, "I thought if I got rich, if I was successful, I'd finally feel sufficient. But I have everything, and I still feel like that 7-year-old boy holding up the test and waiting." Fourth pattern, the inability to express emotions. Children who grow up with emotionally absent fathers learn that emotions are not welcome. If the father never demonstrated emotion, the child understands that emotion is weakness. If the father ignored the child's emotions, the child learns that their emotions don't matter. So the child does what they can to survive. They shut down their emotions. Ethan told me, "I haven't cried in 30 years. When my mom died, I organized the funeral, took care of everything, and felt nothing. People thought I was strong, but I knew I was broken inside. That isn't strength, that's dissociation. A defense that the child created to survive a father who couldn't access his own emotions, and therefore couldn't access the emotions of his son. And there's something more I need to explain about this. Jung identified that when a child shuts down their emotions to survive, they don't shut down only the painful emotions. They shut down all the emotions. The joy, the enthusiasm, the love, the passion. Everything stays on the other side of the glass. Because the emotional system doesn't work like a selective faucet, you can't simply close off sadness and keep joy flowing. When you repress one emotion, you repress the ability to feel in general. Ethan described it with a perfect metaphor. He said, "It's as if I took emotional anesthesia when I was a kid. The pain disappeared, but the sensation of being alive disappeared too." And that explains why so many people who have experienced paternal emotional neglect describe the same sensation, a life that seems empty, even when it's full, a success that doesn't satisfy, a love that doesn't warm, because the system that should process these experiences was shut down a long time ago, out of necessity or survival. But now, what was protection has become a prison. And now, I need to tell you something that will seem difficult to accept, but it's crucial for your healing. Your father probably also had an emotionally absent father. That's not an excuse, but it's an explanation. Jung talked about psychic inheritance, the patterns that pass from generation to generation. Your father didn't know how to be emotionally present because he never learned, because he never received it, because his own father was also absent. And so the cycle continues, from father to son, from generation to generation, a lineage of men who don't know how to feel, how to connect, how to be truly present. Ethan discovered this when he talked to his grandfather. Ethan's grandfather lost his own father in the war, grew up without any male figure, never learned what it meant to be a father because he never had one, and passed that inability onto Ethan's father, who passed it onto Ethan, who was passing it onto his own children. The cycle only breaks when someone has the courage to look at the wound. Now, I'm going to show you the exact moment when emotional neglect happens, because it's not a single event. It's a series of moments that accumulate, and it's when the child finally gives up on seeking connection. For Ethan, it was that day at the pool when he was 16. But the moments had been accumulating since forever. The day he cried, and his father told him to stop. The day he wanted a hug, and received a handshake. The day he tried to tell a dream, and his father was too busy to listen. The day he needed advice, and received a list of instructions. The day he simply wanted to talk, and found a wall. Each of these moments was a little death, and at some point, the child stops trying. That's the moment of abandonment. Not when the father leaves, but when the child gives up on reaching the father who was never accessible. You might be wondering, but my father loved me in his own way. That's the phrase that emotionally abandoned children repeat to themselves, and it might even be true. Your father may have loved you in the only way he knew how, but that doesn't change the impact. A child needs more than theoretical love. A child needs love felt. Love that manifests in gazes, in presence, in attention, in connection. If you never felt that your father was genuinely interested in who you were inside, the love he felt didn't reach you, and you grew up hungry for something you couldn't name, seeking in every relationship, in every achievement, in every external validation, that which your father should have given, and never finding it. Jung said something that changed my understanding of this. He said that the father represents the external world to the child. When the father is emotionally present, the child feels that they have a place in the world. When the father is emotionally absent, the child feels that the world has no place for them. And that explains why so many people who had emotionally absent fathers feel that they don't belong, that they are always on the outside, that they observe life happening without really participating. Ethan described it perfectly. He said, "At parties, at family gatherings, at work, I always feel like an outsider, like I'm peering into other people's lives through a window. I never feel like I'm truly in it." This is the result of a child who was never brought inside by their father, who never received the message, "You belong, you're welcome, you're one of us." Now, I need to tell you about the shadow. Jung identified that everything we repress goes into the shadow, the unconscious part of our psyche. Children who were emotionally neglected by their father often repress anger, because it was dangerous to feel anger toward a father who was already so distant. If you demonstrated anger, you could lose what little you had. So the anger went into the shadow, and that repressed anger manifests in distorted ways, sometimes as depression, which is anger turned inward, sometimes as toxic relationships, where you unconsciously seek to express the anger you couldn't feel in childhood, sometimes as an existential void because you cut off access to all emotions in order to not feel the anger. Ethan had chronic depression that no medication could resolve. When he finally accessed the anger he felt toward his father, the depression began to diminish. Not because anger is good, but because repressed emotion is poison. And when you finally allow it to exist, it can be processed and released. You, who are watching this video, if any part of you recognized yourself in these words, if you always felt that your father was physically present, but emotionally absent, if you carry a void that you can't explain, if you compulsively seek validation, if you have difficulty trusting even those who love you, then this wound is still active in you. And the only way to heal it is to acknowledge it. It's not inventing excuses for your father. It's not pretending it didn't happen. It's looking directly at the truth. My father was physically present but emotionally absent. and it affected me deeply. I deserved more. I deserved a father who was really there. And the fact that I didn't receive that is not my fault. You've just understood something that maybe you've spent your entire life not being able to name. Paternal emotional neglect is invisible because the father was there, but the wound is as real as if he had left. In fact, in some aspects, it's more confusing because you weren't allowed to feel the loss. After all, he was present. If you want more people to understand this hidden wound, if you want this kind of content to continue existing, you can support me by clicking the super thanks down below. Every contribution allows me to dedicate more time to researching Jung and bringing these truths that few people have the courage to speak about. It's not just financial support. It's you saying, this truth needs to be known, and you helping other wounded children to finally understand what happened to them. Now, I'm going to tell you what happened with Ethan. After months of work, he finally managed to cry. At 43 years old, for the first time since adolescence, he cried. And what he cried about wasn't the death of his mother. He cried for the 7-year-old boy who showed a school paper to his father and received nothing. He cried for all the times he sought connection and found a wall. He cried for the childhood that seemed typical, but was actually profoundly lonely. And when he finally cried, something changed. Not instantly, not magically, but for the first time, he felt. He felt the sadness. He felt the anger, he felt the grief, and he realized that these emotions didn't destroy him, that he could feel them and continue existing, that maybe, just maybe, he could learn to connect. The healing process of the negative father complex is long. Jung said that you don't heal the wound by pretending it doesn't exist. You heal by integrating the shadow. That means looking at all the parts of yourself that were repressed. The anger, the sadness, the need, the desire to be seen, and allowing them to exist, not acting on them blindly, but recognizing them, feeling them, integrating them. And that starts with a simple step, but one that seems impossible for someone who has spent their life repressing. Allow yourself to ask, what am I feeling right now? Not what I should feel, not what it makes sense to feel, but what I'm really feeling at this exact moment. For Ethan, that question was initially impossible to answer. He would spend minutes in silence and say, I don't know, I don't feel anything. But with practice, the answers began to appear. First in fragments, a tightness in the chest, a tension in the shoulders, an emptiness in the stomach, then in named emotions, anxiety, sadness, fear, anger, and finally, in connection. The ability to be present with what he felt, without running away, without judging, without repressing. This is what Jung called the feeling function. And for people with a father wound, recovering this function is essential. Because the father who didn't feel created a son who learned not to feel. And the son is only freed when he relearns to feel. Ethan started to do this. He started to notice when he was seeking external validation to fill the internal void. He started to notice when he was disconnecting from his own emotions. He started to practice presence with his own children, giving them what he never received. And little by little, the glass between him and his emotions began to crack. There's a Jungian concept called individuation. It's the process of becoming who you really are, not who your parents wanted you to be, not the version of you that was created to survive, but your true self. For people with a father wound, individuation involves making peace with the absence, not forgiving in the sense of pretending it didn't hurt, but accepting that it happened, and choosing not to let it continue defining your life. Ethan never had the conversation he wanted with his father. His father died before Ethan understood the wound, but Ethan learned that he didn't need his father to heal. He could become the father to himself. He could give himself the presence he never received. He could look inward and say, "I see you. You exist. You matter." And that internal voice, over time, began to fill the void that his father left. Now I want to ask you a question directly. If your father was physically present but emotionally absent, what was the moment when you realized that? Maybe it was a specific moment like Ethan at the pool. Maybe it was a gradual realization. Maybe you're only realizing this now. Comment below. What was the phrase or situation that made you realize your father wasn't really there? I read all the comments and respond in the next few hours, because each shared story helps someone realize they aren't alone. Before we finish, I need to tell you something important. If you grew up with an emotionally absent father, you developed adaptations, survival mechanisms that helped you get through childhood. These mechanisms were necessary. You did the best you could with what you had. But now, in adulthood, these same mechanisms may be limiting you. The ability to shut down emotions that protected you as a child now prevents you from connecting. The constant search for validation that gave you some sense of worth now exhausts you. The distrust that protected you from further disappointment now isolates you. What was armor has become a prison. And the good news is that prisons can be opened. You don't have to continue living behind glass. The path begins with acknowledgement. Acknowledging that the wound exists, that emotional neglect is real, that you deserved more, and that it wasn't your fault. You were a child. You did what you could. And now, as an adult, you have the ability to do differently, not with your father. That relationship may never be what you needed, but with yourself, you can learn to be present for yourself. You can learn to see yourself. You can learn to say to yourself the words that your father never said. I see you. You matter. You are enough, exactly as you are. Ethan sent me a message 6 months after we finished our work together. He said, "Yesterday, my 8-year-old son came to show me a drawing, and I stopped everything. I looked him in the eyes. I asked about every detail. I saw his face light up. And I realized I was giving him what I never received. It's not too late to break the cycle. That is the power of looking at the wound. When you understand what happened to you, you can choose to do differently. You can be the father you needed, first for yourself, then for those you love, and thus the cycle that came from generations finally stops." If this video helped you understand something about your own story, subscribing to the channel helps me continue bringing this kind of content. And if you know someone who also had a father who was there but wasn't, share this video, because what is not seen cannot be healed, and many people spend their whole lives without understanding why they feel so empty, when they apparently had everything, until they watch a video like this and finally realize, the problem was never me. The problem was what I never received. Your father may have been there every day of your childhood, but if he was never emotionally present, if he never truly saw you, if he never told you with his eyes that you mattered, then there was abandonment, an invisible abandonment, an abandonment that you weren't allowed to feel, but that shaped who you became. And now, finally, you can look at that truth. You can feel what you needed to feel, and you can begin the healing that should have started a long time ago. The boy or girl that you were is still inside you, still waiting to be seen, still waiting for someone to stop and look into their eyes, still waiting to hear the words that never came. That child no longer needs to wait for the father who could never be present. That child can finally receive what they needed from you, and that someone can be you. You can be the father you needed. You can give yourself the presence you never received. And you can finally say to that child, I am here. I'm not going anywhere, and I see you.